Hey, come here. You know, there's no proof for God, right? I mean, like you can't actually prove God exists. So if there's no proof for God and you can't prove that he exists, like why continue to believe something that you can't prove? Hi everybody, welcome back to episode 6 of this series of OTNC inside of a series called Reasons to Believe. So we're talking about reasons to believe and we're in episode 6, but don't worry, there are a few more episodes coming up. Problem of evil, problem of hell, the Bible's full of errors. But today I thought I'd look at a more general idea. What proof is there that God even exists? Well, there is none. And when I say that, let me clarify what I exactly mean when I say that. And I don't know if you guys have noticed, but we kind of changed locations just to mix it up a little bit, get a little bit moody maybe. And if you're quiet, you might even be able to hear the crickets. But maybe not. You know, proof is an interesting word because usually we use it in a sentence like, where's the proof? Show me the proof. But really what we're asking is, where is the evidence that will prove to me whether something is true or false? When I say, where's the proof, what I'm really asking is, where's the evidence? What's the arguments that you can set up for me that can either bring me to a conclusion that something's true or something's false? And so when someone says that you can't prove God to them or that there's no proof that God exists, technically they're right. Proof really comes down to the interpretation of the evidence set before them, the arguments set before them, what their conclusion actually is. And so when I get into discussions about the existence of God or the Bible or Jesus, I try to never say that I can prove to them that God exists, or that I can prove to them that the New Testament is reliable, or that I can prove to them that Jesus is Lord. In fact, I'll usually try to say something along the lines of, I can give you the evidence, I can give you the arguments, I can give you the reasons why I think God is real, the New Testament is reliable, that Jesus is Lord, that he was who he says he was. And when I say evidence, arguments, or reasons, I'm really talking about facts. I'm not saying that this is what I feel, but I'm talking about the things that you can kind of research and come to a certain conclusion that, yeah, this is true or this is false. Again, not emotions or feelings, but facts. Which raises up kind of an interesting question, because if we're talking about facts, then why aren't more people coming to believe in Jesus? Like, shouldn't they just see the facts and then be like, oh yeah, that's true? But we still have people coming to different conclusions of whether if God exists or not. And that's something we'll talk about a little bit later. I think I'm getting ahead of myself. You know, 2 verses that we kind of kicked this series off with, if you remember going back to episode 1 of Know Someone, Know Something, we talked about 1 Peter 3:15 and 2 Corinthians 5:20. But in your hearts, revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give a reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect. Therefore, we are ambassadors for Christ. Since God is making his appeal through us, we plead on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God. And the reason why I want to go back and look at these verses is because don't you ever feel like you're just not the right person for the job? I mean, as Christians, right, we know that we're supposed to bring the good news to the ends of the earth. I mean, this is the Great Commission. It's in every church's mission statement. I mean, this is something we know that we're supposed to do. And yet, when it really comes down to it, don't you just feel like ill-equipped? Like you aren't that person? How would I ever do that? Like what would I actually say if I ever got in a conversation about something with God and like asking questions, and how would I respond? I mean, I don't want to look bad. I don't want to make God look bad. I mean, I just don't know enough. And I can't even start to think about what if they disagree with me? What do I do then? And I just want to say, don't worry about that too much, because the good news is that you will fail. Wait, is that good news? You probably will say the wrong thing, and people will definitely disagree with you. Where's the good news in knowing this? The good news is to always remember that God doesn't use perfection. God doesn't use people who are perfect. God uses people who are willing. And so the real question you need to ask yourself is, are you willing to engage in these conversations? Because You will fail and you will mess up and you will say the wrong thing, but it's only through engagement that you get a chance to fail. It's only through your willingness that God can actually use you. He's not looking for perfection, He's looking for willingness. And on the same note, it's also important to know that you can feel equipped. You can feel more comfortable with people disagreeing with you. But it all takes you going out there and doing it. And I think a great place to start is kind of what we want to talk about this morning. And I want to talk about what are some of those evidences, those arguments, those reasons to believe that God even exists. Again, evidence isn't proof. Proof is the conclusion that we come to because of the evidence. But what are some of those things that would lead a person to believe that God actually exists, that He's real, that He's not just this imaginary being, that He's not some kind of crutch that people just use to make themselves feel better? Is there actual good reasons to believe that God exists? And as we go through a few of these arguments, I just want you to know that you don't have to memorize all of the arguments. You don't have to memorize all of the details. Sometimes people just need to hear that there is an argument, that there are arguments out there. Because it's been my experience that when I engage in these conversations and they say, well, there is no proof, or there is no evidence, or there is no reason to believe about God, and I'm able to spout off, 4 or 5 different arguments, that's really all people need. I didn't need to go into this exhaustive explanation of what the argument actually was or a detailed breakdown of how it actually works. All they really did need was to hear like, yeah, here's an argument for it. And they go, huh, I didn't know that. So my goal this morning is just to give you a few of those arguments and a brief description about what those arguments actually are. So let's do it. Here we go. Let's start with something that we've kind of already talked about, and it's the moral argument. Now, the moral argument isn't saying that you can't be good without God. The real question is, what is good without God? It's really 2 different things, because you can be an atheist, you can be a Buddhist, you can be a Muslim, you can be any type of religion or non-religion you want and still be a good person. But the question is, what defines good? If there is no God, who defines the objective moral truths that we see in the real world? Is it a person? Is it a thing? Is it a culture? What is it? And by objective moral truths, I mean those things that just aren't our opinion. Because if God doesn't exist, then objective moral truths don't exist either. Everything just becomes ice cream. Just a matter of preference, a matter of opinion, a matter of the flavor of the week. C.S. Lewis had this great illustration, and it goes something along the lines of, how can a person call a stick crooked if he's never seen something straight or he's had nothing to compare it to? And really, this is what we're talking about when we talk about the moral argument, when we talk about objective moral truths. How can we say something is wrong unless we are comparing it to some type of standard? And if there's some type of standard, who set that standard? And when you really look at this standard, you have to see that it can't be us who sets the standard. Because if it's us, if it's our people, if it's our society, it's our culture, well then what happens when one culture comes to head with another culture and they believe 2 radically different things? Well, you can't really say that one is right or one is wrong, because it's just a matter of opinion now. They do what they do and we do what we do, but what if they do intervenes with what we do, and it's like, whoa, you're stepping on my toes now. That's wrong. But is it? Or is it just your opinion that it's wrong? When we look at this standard inside of the world, we have to realize that it has to come from something outside of it. It can't be the people inside, because then it's just, again, opinion. Might makes right. The person with the most power is going to make all the rules. And that's just not how things work. Again, the moral argument says, if we see a standard out in the world, who set that standard? Is it us, or is it something bigger than us? I think the logical, more reasonable explanation is something bigger than us. If we see laws, who's the lawgiver? Next argument, the cosmological argument. And that's really just a big word for saying when we look out at the universe, it really points us to a creator. The argument is super simple, and the great thing about this argument is that you have science on your side. Science actually backs this idea up. But here's how the argument plays out. Everything that began to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. That's it. That's the whole argument. And I get it. You might be thinking like, what does that even mean though? Like, you said a lot of words, but I have no idea what you're actually saying. How am I supposed to share that with somebody? Well, let's break it down. Let's look at that first thing. Everything that began to exist has a cause. And basically, you can really look at that as, do you see things popping out of nowhere into existence? Are things popping into existence out of thin air? No, because everything that begins to exist has a cause. You're not afraid and you're not paranoid of an elephant jumping into your room, just popping into existence, because that wouldn't make sense. For an elephant to get into your room, there would have to be a chain of things that would have to happen, and you would be well aware of it. And we don't fear things popping into existence because we know that we can trace things back to how things actually happened, and we can be prepared for those things. If you have eggs in your refrigerator, those just didn't pop into existence. They got there somehow, whether you went out and you gathered the eggs from your coop, or you went to the market and you bought some eggs there, and you can still trace it back further. Where did those eggs come from that were in the market? Did they pop into existence? No, they probably came from a truck, and that truck went to a farm, and that farm got it from a farmer, and that farmer went into the pen and he got it from the nest or whatever, and that nest came from the chicken. You know what I'm saying? There's a long line of things. They're just not popping into existence. There's a thing that goes on. You say, I can trace back how this actually got here. Everything that began to exist has a cause. You had a cause. And that cause was your parents' relationship with each other, which caused you. And your parents had a cause because their parents. Now, this is where science kicks in, because the real question is, did the universe have a beginning? And if the universe had a beginning, what was that cause? People have always tried to suggest that the universe has just always been. It's been there forever. It's eternal. But really, science says otherwise. Science says that the universe hasn't always been, that it actually had a beginning. And we can look at things like the law of second thermodynamics, or the law of general relativity, or even the expansion of the universe, which was confirmed by the Hubble telescope. Like, all of these things point us to saying the universe had a beginning. And so if the universe had a beginning, what was the cause of that beginning? And to say that the universe brought itself into existence is kind of ludicrous, because if it's not existing, how can it bring itself into existence? It just doesn't really make sense. And if you think about it hard enough, your brain might explode. Maybe it's just me, but I might be dense or something. But if the universe did have a beginning, you have to ask, what caused that universe to come into existence? And as a Christian, or as a believer, as someone who believes in a higher power, you would have to say, well, it would have to be something powerful enough and be outside of space, time, and matter, because those things all came into creation. So whatever created those things, whatever put those things into motion, has to be bigger than that, which we would say that's God. The cosmological argument. There you go. Next thing. The teleological argument. Again, that's just another big word for looking outside and saying, wow, this looks like it was designed. The fine-tuning of the universe. Did you know that there are 26 fundamental constants that give us our universe? And if any one of those constants is changed, no universe, no planets, no stars, no earth, no life. And this has really baffled so many scientists and physicists, that when they look out in the universe, there seems to be a thing of design. There seems to be something that says, listen, this just wasn't by chance. And we're not just talking space, and we're not just talking the universe, but we're even talking biologically. I mean, DNA really are blueprints for life. And did those randomly come together and make us? Well, this is the question that people are asking, and more that people look into it, they're saying, listen, the numbers just don't add up. There has to be some type of designer, some great mathematician that put these things into place. And these 26 fundamental constants are things that I would never even think about. Even if I were to think about it, I'd be like, I don't even know exactly what I'm saying, really, or what this actually means. And just a lot of big words and big numbers and crazy stuff. But let me give you a few. Like, have you ever thought about what it takes and how well designed the gravitational pull of protons and neutrons inside of an atom? If it were any less or any greater, they wouldn't exist. They wouldn't be able to be. Or even at the rate that the universe is expanding, if it were any slower or any faster, again, no planets, no stars, no sky, no us. I mean, I've heard it say that, the universe is kind of like, you look at all these different dials, and the universe is so dialed in precisely to all these little different things. And it's like, if this one's off then it's going to mess up this one. And if this one's off, it's going to mess up that one. And again, even if one of these are off, there's like a chain reaction of all of them being off. And again, there's no life. Life isn't possible if something is off in our universe. And I never understood the magnitude or the numbers behind how precise this actually has to be until someone actually broke it down for me. And I'm going to read their notes that I got, and maybe it'll blow your mind like it did to me. But this is, just one constant, like the gravitational pull of gravity. Listen to this. If you look at how precise gravity would have to be for life, imagine that there's a dial, and this dial has, all these little ticks that you could dial it to. And these ticks would be, 10 to the 60th power. That's 10 with 60 zeros behind it. So, all of those little things are 10 to the 60th power. And you would have to do it just right. And if you're off just a tenth, or this way or that way, there's no life. And we're just talking gravity here. But listen to this. 10 to the 60th power, 10 with 60 zeros behind it. It sounds crazy, but the crazier thing is that your body only has 10 to the 14th power. Your body, how many cells there are in there? 10 to the 14th power. And for gravity, for it to be so precise, has to be 10 to the 60th power. That's a lot more zeros. Or listen to this. The number of seconds between when time began and now is only 10 to the 20th power. 10 to the 20th power. And for gravity to be as precise as it is 10 to the 60th power. Again, still a lot more zeros. And if gravity was off, again, by just one tick, no life, no planets, no stars, no skies, nothing. Crazy. And it's like this with all 26 fundamental constants. If they're off by just a little bit, there's no life. Everything gets disrupted. So the question is, when we see this precise design, when we see this precise fine-tuning, how did it all happen? There's a great illustration of the blind watchmaker that if you are walking along a beach and you see, the waves are bringing in and out sand and stuff like that, and then you see a watch, do you just think like, wow, how did the ocean do that? That it put all this stuff together and, you see this watch come ashore? Did that happen by natural, unplanned things, or was there a design behind it? Because when you open up that watch, there's incredible amount of design. This has to go to here, and for it to go around in the seconds, this gear has to touch this gear, and for it to be, the right amount of seconds, it just has to be precise. Do you believe like that just happened by chance, or if there was a designer? And if there's a design that we see in the universe, then who is that designer? Again, we would say the designer is God. The fine-tuning of the universe. Great argument for the existence of God. Next argument. Now, this last argument that I'm going to share with you is a little more philosophical. It's a little more heady, and I don't want to spend too much time with it because if I do, your head will explode, but it's called the ontological argument. If you like to dig into things that make you think, if you like to dig into things that will make your mind explode, look into the ontological argument because it will happen. And then we'll have to resuscitate you. But the ontological argument, and this is what it says. I have to read it because I get confused if I don't read it. It says this, that if it's even possible for a God to exist, then God must exist. Sounds pretty simple, but it'll blow your mind because let me think about it. If God is something that we define as the greatest conceivable being, meaning when we think of God, we think of, man, this God would be all kind and all powerful and all loving and all knowing, and he would be everywhere at once. Like this is the greatest conceivable thing that you can think of that God is. If that's even possible to think about, if it's even possible that he would exist, then he has to exist. So this is, where it gets kind of heady, kind of philosophical. It's like, okay, if you could imagine a world that existed where that type of being existed, well then God probably exists. Because if there's a world that we can think of that has a God that's all powerful and all loving and all knowing and all of those things, well then he just wouldn't be God of that world or that reality, but he would be God of all worlds and all realities. Because again, if he's the greatest conceivable thing, why would we limit him to just this box? He would be outside of that box and outside of that box that box is inside of. Yeah, that sounds right. But this is the ontological argument. If you can even fathom the idea of a God existing that's all powerful and all knowing and all loving and all the things that you would want a good God to be, then he probably exists. And not only in that world that you can imagine, but in this world. It's crazy. It's mind-blowing. So there are the 4 arguments that I laid out for you. Just knowing the title of those, not necessarily knowing the details, but I can challenge you to know at least one of those that you could share with somebody, that you can give enough information about, whether it's the moral argument or the cosmological argument or just the fine-tuning of the universe. Maybe not the ontological argument, because that makes my mind hurt. But here are the pieces of evidence that you could actually give to somebody. But looping back around to where we started, if these are pieces of evidence, again, these aren't feelings, but facts, then why don't more people come to believe? If we're looking at facts, why don't more people stop and say, oh yeah, that makes sense. I believe in the existence of God. I mean, it's a great question. How could 2 people look at these arguments and come to 2 different conclusions? Well, the answer is, really, we are adverse to knowing God. We have something against him. We're enemies of him in some ways. Either we can't rationally make sense of there being a God who would love us, or there's just a lot of emotional objections that go into thinking about there being a God. I mean, if it's the rational part of us trying to fathom how can there be a God out there, well, this is why we have apologetics. This is why we have things like, the ontological argument or the teleological argument, the cosmological or the moral argument, to help us think through those things of saying like, okay, this makes the most sense. How do we rationalize there being a God? But when it comes to emotional objections, it really is a different ball game, because you're no longer talking about the facts anymore, but you're talking about your feelings. And let me give you an example of some of those emotional objections. Like, let's say you hear something like the cosmological argument, you say, okay, that makes sense. I can rationally understand what you're saying, but why would I want to be a Christian? They're all hypocrites and they're all mean. Every Christian that I've met has treated me horribly, or they treat people horribly, or they try to cheat each other. Like, why would I want to be a part of that? Well, that's good to know, but that has nothing to do with the existence of God. That has more to do with the people around you, but that doesn't deny that there is a God or isn't a God out there. It's just more of your emotional response to the people who believe in God. But that doesn't change the fact that if God is real, then he's all knowing, he's all powerful, and he's all loving, and he's everywhere at once. That's an emotional rejection. Emotional objection. Or another thing is that when we hear an argument, we say, yeah, I can follow that argument, but if I believe that there's a God out there, that means I have to start doing some things differently. It means I'm going to have to stop doing some things that I really like, and I'm not sure I want to do that. Again, just because you have to start something or stop something doesn't mean that God doesn't exist, but it's more of an emotional objection. It's like, I don't want to do that. That I feel like if God is real, then I have to change, and I don't really want to do that. Again, that's an emotional objection to God. It's not a rational one. It's not looking at the facts. It's looking at your feelings. And then finally, there's just the one that's like, I just don't want to change. I don't want to bow the knee to anyone. I want to be my own God. And again, that's no real argument against God. That's just you being, well, you trying to be your own God. And those are really the 3 objections, or how people object to God. It's either rational, they just can't make sense of it, which we have apologetics, we have arguments, we have reasons to believe. But then there's the emotional one. It's like, yeah, but those people are mean. Those people are mean-spirited. Those people are greedy. Those people are hypocrites. And then there's the third one. It's just like, yeah, I just don't want to do it because I don't want to do it. And it's hard to deal with sometimes. The first one is the easiest one to deal with because it's talking about evidence, talking not about feelings, not about how, you take things, but really just looking at the facts. And just because someone might have objections to those arguments, some people might have objections to God, don't let that be a deterrent from you being a good ambassador. Again, being a good ambassador doesn't mean that you're perfect. It just means that you're willing. And if you want to be a good ambassador, if you want to preach the gospel to the ends of the world, this is my challenge to you. I want you to try this. Love in a way that is so fundamental and so radical that it makes people wonder why you would even do that. Because being a Christian means a lot of things. It means that people will look at you weird. They'll look at you weird for what you believe. I mean, you sing songs about blood covering you and that making you clean. That sounds very culty. That sounds very strange. How would blood covering me then make me clean? That's really weird. Or they'll look at you and you say, you believe in a man rising from the dead? Really? That's scientifically impossible. That makes no sense. You're silly. You're probably stupid too. And I don't know if I like you right now. But even with all of your crazy beliefs, if you love in a radical way, they'll never question that. They might question your belief system. They might question how crazy you are or how sane you are. But one thing they should never question is how you love them. I mean, and how powerful is that? That if you were to love in a way that was so sacrificial and so unself-serving that they'd be like, moved, be like, why do you act like that? And this is then your opportunity to say, well, the reason I act like this is because God exists. And these are my reasons why I believe God exists. I really do believe that good works lead to good favor, which lead to good news. Meaning if you could love so radically that people would, find favor in you, that they would even stand up for you, even when people said you're crazy, they might say, yeah, they're crazy, but they love me enough to do this. Which would lead to good news where you could say, I love you like this because God has loved me and I believe there's a God for these reasons. You have heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. Again, there's this idea of radical love for those people who hate you, who persecute you, who aren't like you. Why? So that you might be children of your Father in heaven. That's the only reason why. God loved you, so you're going to love others. A new commandment I give to you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. Again, it's not a new commandment, but it's a powerful one. How do you love your neighbor? Is it the way that you would love a neighbor, or is it how God loved you as a neighbor? That when you were enemies, He loved you. He gave up everything for you. And trust me, good work leads to good favor, which will lead to good news. And here are the 4 arguments for some of those good news. So, thank you again. I'll see you guys next week, and bye.